what Einstein is to physics, what the Wright brothers are to travel.
Vision without, execution is just hallucination.
So upset by this.
There's also the question of, despite his impact, was it the right impact, which is a whole other conversation.
In New Orleans, it's not yet cocktail hour.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to look to the experts.
But that's like saying George Washington's mother is, important.
No!
Polymarket is wondering which company has the best AI, or we are wondering which company has the best AI model by the end of April. So in the next 5 weeks, between Anthropic, Google, DeepSeek, XAI, OpenAI, what are we thinking? Polymarket has it Anthropic at 80%.
I'm going with Gemini.
You're going with Gemini?
Yeah.
Honestly, me too.
Yeah.
Can't really bet against the big dogs.
Yeah. Anthropic is surging right now, but would you bet against Dennis from Google? No.
I think it'd be a mistake to ever bet against Google, but the Anthropic growth it's impressive.
Impressive. Walter Isaacson, Ken Burns in Mount Rushmore from 1900 to now of non-presidents. Where we first start out is either one of you, but we'll start Walter, we'll introduce Ken Burns, and then Ken, you'll introduce Walter. And then what we do is each one of us does our four. So we'll write them down. And then the four of us will come to 1-4, which will be the Rushmore.
Ken Burns is the premier documentarian of our day and generation. And I certainly think we all know the Civil War, baseball, jazz, the national parks, Vietnam War. But of course, now we've got the American Revolution just in time for the 250th. And I assume he's joining us from Nosebleed, New Hampshire. I can't remember where.
Walpole, New Hampshire. Yeah,
Hey,
Walpole, New Hampshire.
Ken, how many docs have you done, and how did you get started?
So it's about 40, I think, that PBS. So that, even an hour-long film, Brooklyn Bridge, the first one counts as one, but so does 20 hours on jazz count as one. So I got started because I watched my dad cry after my mom died, not at her death, but at a movie. And I decided I wanted to be a feature filmmaker. And then
How old were you?
I was 11 when she died, 12 when this happened. He was watching Odd Man Out by Sir Carol Reed, about the Irish Troubles, James Mason. Really good film, actually. And I just said right then and there, I got it. I said, that's what I want to be. And that meant being Howard Hawks or David Lean or Alfred Hitchcock or John Ford. And then I went to Hampshire College.
Is that your four Rushmores of filmmakers?
No.
That's a good four.
That's a pretty good four, though.
It's a pretty good four, American four, but you'd miss Wells and you'd need to add some contemporary people like Coppola and Scorsese and that like that, and then you'd leave out Kurosawa and Luis Buñuel and
let me just say something. It is always hard to get to four. I was wondering, do any of you know why they just picked 4 for Mount Rushmore?
It's just, it had to do a lot with the size that Borglund did. I did a film on the Roosevelts, and there's a wonderful scene where Roosevelt pulls up, he can't walk, in his touring car up there as they're about to dedicate, I think maybe it's the second one. Maybe it's Jefferson's face. I think Washington's already. And he says there'll be many dedications. And of course, it will be Lincoln and his fifth cousin, Theodore. And then he says, I hope that when 1,000 years from now, and think about what had happened 1,000 years before 1934, where we were, or 35, whenever this took place, that they would think of us and they'd look back at us and they'd say that we had done our best to promote this, which is why if you had released me from the president's business, FDR is the next person on that Mount Rushmore, but we're not doing that.
Well, it's up there now. So Doris and John Meacham, we did one where we said if it was now and you were redoing Rushmore, I'll send you that.
Oh.
I'll send you that episode. You can't believe
please.
it.
FDR deserves that. Yeah. But I am so happy to be here with Walter Isaacson, who is my dear friend and who is one of the great biographers and historians of our present time and has done extraordinary works on things like Leonardo da Vinci and Benjamin Franklin and Steve Jobs
Yeah.
and Elon Musk and a whole variety of things betwixt and between, and has inspired two of my films. And he had to twist my arm. I was doing Benjamin Franklin and we were having dinner, and he twisted my arm to do Leonardo. And I'm saying, I don't do non-American topics. And I ended up walking out of the dinner kind of sort of like, Walter, give it up. And then talked to my daughter, and she said, well, why can't we do it? And I went, all right, why can't we? So I have Walter to thank for one of the greatest cinematic experiences I've ever had. And I'm sure Sarah Burns and her husband, David McMahon, my co-directors on this, would agree, one of the greatest cinematic experiences we've had, courtesy of Walter Isaacson, one of the great, conjurers of history.
Walter, what are you working on now besides the book you just did? Is there a new book that you're thinking about?
I'm doing Marie Curie, partly because after doing Elon Musk, I've got to go back a century or so and have a bit of a rest. Just like I always do that. After doing Henry Kissinger, I had to go
Right.
back 250 years and do Ben
Ben
Franklin.
Franklin.
Yeah.
And after doing your friend Steve Jobs, I went back 500 years and did Leonardo. So
I thought
think
you were
I'm-
going to do at one point Tesla because of Elon.
Nikola Tesla. It'd be interesting, especially his disputes with Edison.
Right.
You get intellectual
That was an
property
unbelievable
in there.
fight, the two of them.
Yeah, totally. There were great intellectual property fights, including, of course, Westinghouse.
Right.
George Westinghouse is part of it. I think we have a 1900 cutoff date for this.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure either Edison or Tesla sneak in
They
under
don't.
the wire, 'cause most of their work was done before.
If they do, we could certainly add Frederick Douglass, who died. Actually, no, he dies in 95.
We can warm up by doing the 1800s. Although one thing about the list of biographies I've done, as Ken noticed, is there are no presidential biographies.
Yeah.
Why is
Well
that?
suited for this podcast.
Yeah.
Why
yeah.
is that?
Because Meacham told me to stay off his turf.
Walter's dead serious.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
you did
no,
that.
I'm sure he does, and nobody crosses John Meacham.
And
the
how
deacon.
many films right now, Ken, are you working on?
I'm working on, besides this revolution, which won't quit. I mean, you'll know this better than I. At the end of November, after it was broadcast, it was the first time that it had hit the top 10. PBS had hit the top 10s of streamers, and they said 565 million minutes. It sounded like a lot to me. It's now over 4 billion. So I could spend the rest of my life just servicing the curiosity about the American Revolution. But we're doing a history of LBJ and the Great Society. We're doing one on Reconstruction called Emancipation to Exodus, the most misunderstood period in American history. We've been, I've filmed for the last 5 years 8 two-hour interviews with Barack Obama. I think I've got 2 to go. He'd probably say 1. And there's no rush because we do want to escape the specific gravity of journalism and move into some historical perspective. But the presence of Donald Trump on the national scene has kind of constipated scholarship so that you don't have a kind of critical mass of books yet about Obama that you would have normally had by this time to give you some perspective. We're also been filming people who knew Dr. King in support of a film biography of him, and we just took on the history of the CIA.
Oh, I can't wait for that.
God. The American Revolution was incredible, Ken.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
I called him right. I don't know.
Yeah, you did. You
And
did.
It was like
so nice.
the brutality of that war.
Yeah.
And
But it's been, and the reason why it's such a surprise is that we've been taught a kind of sanitized Madison Avenue version of it. And I think I understand is that we accept the violence of the Civil War and the 20th century wars, but we want to protect the ideas, and we somehow think those big ideas would be diminished if we told the full story. But actually, I think they're made even more impressive
Agreed.
by understanding that it's a bloody revolution and a bloody Civil War, and probably the fifth, certainly the fourth global war over the prize of North America. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
There are also little nuances in that movie that make you. I think there's a little quote in that movie like, "It was more important for Washington not to lose than to win."
That was that's what I talked to Ken about. I
Yeah,
said
you did.
That,
You said-
that
you
he
called me already.
realized. I don't
gonna
know, Walter.
survive.
Like he realized. I don't know. Like 4 years in, the most important thing was just not to lose, just to hang in there. And
Yeah, it's
when
'cause
you
he's-
think about wars all over the world.
He's Ho Chi Minh, right? He's just, he's the head of an insurgency. By the way, Ho Chi Minh, when he declared, this is a sidebar, when he declared Vietnamese independence on September 2nd, 1945, as many people might remember, is the day the Japanese surrendered in Tokyo Bay on the USS Missouri unconditionally. He took that moment to declare Vietnamese independence, quoted Thomas Jefferson, and standing next to him were two OSS guys. Within a month, they'd be gone. The State Department would have waved them off and said, he's a commie. But if we'd stayed with him, there'd be 6 million more human beings still alive today.
Well, here we go. Walter, you're 4.
Wait, the question is, what are the odds that he and I have, and I think there's a good possibility
0.
that we do.
You probably have 1 or 2.
Somebody
we have
in
one
common.
in common.
No,
We
you're
have-
definitely going to have somebody in common.
I definitely know who that person is
Okay.
in common.
We have one in common. You know who it is.
Oh, wow. Did you guys talk?
I think we probably
No,
all
no,
have
no,
that.
no, no.
I think we
No,
probably
we
all have
just-
this person in common. I think there's probably one person.
we know this, and we can probably, you can count us down and we'll say
All
it.
right, shush. Ken, you got to shush. Walter.
Okay, I'm shushed.
Well, I'll preface it by saying that Mount Rushmore, they actually didn't just pick 4 people. They picked 4 great episodes of our nation: the foundation, the expansion, the development, and the preservation. And that's how they picked the 4. And I always like.
Is that was that written somewhere?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
That's the first time I've ever heard that. Sorry.
And so for me, I always believe in the importance of science, technology, innovation as actually being more important than presidents. And so I picked what I think are 4 great innovations and inventions of the 20th century and the people who represented them. The one I picked that I know Ken has also picked is Louis Armstrong,
Louis
the invention
Armstrong.
of jazz and American form of music. And then, oddly enough, I've picked 3 people that I doubt most people would know. One is for television, and Philo Farnsworth probably gets the nod as the person most responsible for in 1927 inventing television. Likewise, somebody you probably wouldn't know would be John Mauchly, but he invents the first digital electronic computer, ENIAC, during World War II in secret. And finally, I put in there, because he's influenced our lives almost more than anybody, Steve Jobs, because the invention not only of the easy-to-use personal computer, a graphical user interface, the iPhone, 1,000 songs in your pocket.
I say this every time. This is not even close to what I expected. Like, not
Really?
even close.
I thought the one name that I thought we all shared was not Lee Armstrong, although that's a great answer.
Okay.
No. I knew. He and I know in our bones it's Louis Armstrong, I've got Steve literally sitting outside my list.
Okay.
But
Are you-
only because
Walter,
peering in.
anything else on yours?
That's 4.
That's
Well,
4.
those of you who got 4, you
Okay.
only paid for 4.
Okay. Ken?
Okay, so I have, drum roll please, Louis Armstrong.
Okay.
The
Wow.
most important person in music. I didn't say jazz in the 20th century. He is to music. I didn't say jazz. What Einstein is to physics and what the Wright brothers are to travel. You could have said what Freud is to medicine and just keep going on and on.
Agreed.
He invents, for lack of a better word, modern time playing before and after the note. He turns jazz from an ensemble music to a soloist art. And when Duke Ellington sees him in Times Square, he says, "I want him on every single instrument." And he did. He tried to assemble a thing that did that, and then he transformed American singing so that if Frank Sinatra were here or Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, they'd all say that he was the person that influenced that. And I did talk to Tony Bennett before he passed away, and he said absolutely, Pops was the person. So
That's
I won't
incredible.
I won't do takeouts on anymore. I just needed to. I don't think Walter would argue with my short précis of Louis Armstrong's importance. I'm cheating a little bit because I got close to a president here. I think Eleanor Roosevelt, and I'm happy to defend it in a second. Martin Luther King, and I would do Henrietta Lacks, who probably you don't know who that is. Walter knows who it is. But she's a black woman who died in 1951, born in 1920, of cervical cancer. And they took her cells and they became immortal. They are the HeLa cell line that have been instrumental in research. Jonas Salk used it in polio, her genes, and it's only recently that her family has been making the rounds of various companies that have exploited her.
Do you think they're going to
immortal
collect on
cells.
that? I know about
They
this.
have. They've already
Have they?
collected once, and they've just made a deal with Novartis, I think, within the last few weeks. And there are other places to do it, but she's an African American woman, completely unsung, and yet, many of the discoveries, many of the abilities to test things, whether it's
Came from
AIDS
her.
or other stuff, come from this treasure house, and it is a gift. It's like Stregonona's, pot of pasta that I read to my girls. It's never ending. They are replicating to this moment and aiding researchers around the world.
Can I ask you a question? How long did it take you guys to get to 4?
3 seconds.
Wait, Ken,
Really?
Ken, say your 4 again. We have Satchmo, we have Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah, don't say Satchmo.
Okay, I won't
It's
ever
just,
again.
Yeah, it was Satchel Mouth, and he preferred Pops, and people did call him that, and he sometimes called himself that. But it was, we say Louis Armstrong.
Okay,
because-
Louis Armstrong.
Louis Armstrong, Eleanor Roosevelt, right?
Yep.
And
Martin Luther King.
King, who was a civil rights leader you may have heard of, and Henrietta Lacks.
Okay.
It didn't take me long to get to 4, but it took me a while to get back down to 4 because
Yes,
I
right.
could easily have done 12. And the question of, to some extent, the rules of the road would have had Albert Einstein, who died as an American citizen, but he was not born as an American citizen.
I gave that as pass.
Yeah,
I was going to ask. I was like, if they died an American citizen,
Yeah.
does it count? But
Yeah. Okay, Ben.
okay, I have George Marshall,
Oh, good one.
which I think is, to me, the most. If there's one on this list, it's him. I think America is America because of him, at least contemporary America. We've lived under the Marshall Plan for 75 years. He put Eisenhower and Patton in power. He took our army from, I think he became the chief of staff of the military on the day that Germany invaded Poland. And our army was 150,000 people. And
I'm pissed I didn't think of him.
in 1945, I think it was 8 million people. And
That's a good name.
MLK.
No, he's really good.
MLK.
And
who I just heard
Roosevelt,
about-
FDR reached down past all these echelons of seniority to pluck Marshall out. So FDR is actually responsible for going
kind of give me that
back
story.
high. Well, he's just, he's got this thing. The war is going to happen. He knew it was going to happen. He's been desperately trying to plan, and the Japanese gave him a favor, and then Hitler a few days later gave him an even better favor, which is declaring war in the United States, so he could declare war on Germany and Italy as well as Japan, which we'd done instantaneously. But he picked Marshall. He knew. He just reached down. It's one of those great stories. A lot of people pissed off, but he picked the right guy.
How far down in the ladder was he?
It's like 8 or 10, as I remember.
Wow.
Jeff Ward, my writer, would probably know exactly what the echelons or the expectations. He was just not in that front pool.
And then
or
Truman
even the
supported it
secondary.
afterwards.
Oh yeah, because look what he did. I mean, Ben
He
is
was-
right.
Was he was Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State for Truman, George Marshall?
Yes, I think
that
that's
I don't
true.
know. I don't remember.
I think that's true.
And then also after he wins the war, leads America to give $18 billion, or to make sure that we're not in World War III 10 years later. MLK,
it's a big-
who Ken just taught me about. We have Walt Disney.
Wow.
I think that it's kind of
Well, from animation on to filmmaking to studio
to the
system.
parks to
Yeah.
and I think that the idea of the entrepreneur and the Imagineer literally is part of the American identity and American DNA. And then Steve Jobs for me, for the same reason that Walter put it. I think that he changed our experience interacting with the world fundamentally and forever, more so than the actual creation of the computer or the creation of software that that may be more transcendent. The phone itself, the iPhone itself, changed the world, and will never be the same. So I
think I had him. He was begging to get in.
He was number 5 for you?
he was peeking in.
No question about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going back and forth because I think Eleanor is a bit of a cheat because she's the wife of her president, but she's also right on everything except prohibition. She's literally right on every issue except prohibition. And you can give her a pass because she watched her father die in the horrible throes of not only alcoholism, but the mental illness that alcoholism sort of provoked in him. And so the idea that you could use government as an instrumentality to change things for the better is not her idea. It's her uncle's idea. And then her husband takes it even further, but she's misguided on prohibition.
So I have Eleanor Roosevelt because
All right.
she was for the 4th year and probably a little bit into the end of the 3rd term, she was the president, in my opinion. Now, it is a cheat, but she was incredible. I mean, everything. I don't know anything she didn't do, and all the books she wrote, and she was an incredible.
The Universal Declaration of Freedom
Yeah.
that she got. I mean, when we made our film, and you know about this in drama, and Walter too. When FDR dies in Warm Springs, in April of 45, I'm thinking, Jesus, I have to make a run, even though it's about the 3 Roosevelts, I have to make a run for the end credits. Like it can't be longer than 20 minutes. And it's a good 45, 50 minutes. And there's nothing there's a narrative that she completely dominates and controls up until the moment she dies.
I mean, yes, it's a cheat because she was like the president, but
Yeah.
great.
And also not a cheat because I think because of her, we realized that role of the first lady is a presidential role.
Yeah.
And so I think it actually is important that I agree. I think it's not a cheat.
I think
I'm really
Ari,
upset with you,
given her
Walt. You
too
haven't
much.
done a book on her since she wasn't a president.
Well,
There's a lot of good company
there.
there.
Is a wonderful Doris
did one.
Yeah, she did.
book.
I'd like to
And,
read yours too.
I'm not sure you can beat Doris's book on Franklin and Eleanor.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was a combination book.
Right. Well, so was your choice in a way.
Okay. Okay, and then I picked MLK.
Okay.
I picked Henry Ford.
Yep.
Invented the assembly line, cars, like the phone.
Eli Whitney invented the assembly
But,
line
he
earlier.
perfected the assembly line and brought it to
you're
the
right.
masses. And like the phone, that period of time, kind of changed. I mean, wasn't anti-Semite, but was incredible in changing kind of
Was
how.
an anti-Semite, but is that just an
Yeah, I
asterisk
did
to
say
you,
that. Yeah.
Ari?
I mean,
Yes,
I
This
got
is a
Walt
big
on mine,
deal.
so.
He thought Jews were responsible
listen,
for the assassination
we're talking
of Abraham
about
Lincoln
what-
and the change in the flavor of his favorite candy bar.
Yeah. So
He's
So he didn't
rabidly
love Jews.
anti-Semitic.
he did not love Jews.
He didn't love Jews.
No. Then
He doesn't even like that a Jew has put him on his list.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So I have 4 ideas I always go over. I do. I'm sorry.
Ari
Dealer's choice.
yells at everybody for cheating, and then he
Yeah,
cheats the
I
entire
cheat all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had Jonas Salk. I have John Van Neumann, because
Yeah.
I mean,
Who was Van Neumann?
he kind of quantum physics. I mean, he does everything we're doing now, as it relates to computers, all that stuff. This guy invented, right?
Yeah, Ben, if you're talking about John Mauchly, for example, I give him credit because he does ENIAC. It is the John von Neumann architecture,
Sure.
and von Neumann helped
Correct.
work on
Yep.
ENIAC. Also, if you have to say by, I don't know, some criteria to figure out who was the smartest person other than Einstein in the 20th century. This guy was speaking Greek and Latin at age 4.
He was
This guy
incredible.
not only invents the
John Van
architecture for
Neumann.
modern
Yeah.
computers.
When was he?
Actually,
when was he-
Elon talked about him when we had,
did a video
this.
game?
This originally started. What would be your favorite last meal in Greece? We were all sitting around, and I think Elon brought him up. That's why I remember.
Smartest guys ever?
Yeah. Smartest guys. Yeah. One of the smartest guys ever.
Okay, so you got a few. What are we choosing?
Leonardo,
Yeah.
maybe the smartest guy.
And
ever.
then,
Non-American.
and then
Non-American.
I had, well, between the two of them, I would go with Van Neumann.
Okay.
Because Salk, yes.
Between Salk and Van Neumann.
Yeah.
Okay.
Salk was so important as it relates to curing that one disease.
But he's using Henrietta Lacks's
exactly.
cells, right?
Yeah. You influenced
Did he
me.
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we battle over 4. We have to end up with a final 4.
Well, for sure, one is MLK.
With 3 out of 4 is MLK.
That's the one I
Yeah,
thought was
I'm,
going
I'm definitely in favor of MLK. In fact,
Yeah.
I'm slightly chagrined. I kind of went for inventors.
I think that's
just 'cause
cool.
That's
Yeah,
my
but you could have
lane.
said, Walter, you could have said he has his own, in Washington, they kind of give him his praise and say,
Oh yeah, no, I think MLK definitely deserves
okay, so
it.
MLK. There's
All right.
two.
We got 2
Eleanor Roosevelt.
There's 2 Eleanor Roosevelts. There's 2 Louis Armstrongs.
Yeah.
They're-
So we'll take those. This is going to be.
I mean, I didn't really think. But do you really think Louis Armstrong was for like the influence of?
What Einstein is to physics, what the Wright brothers are to travel.
But
There
do
is-
we think
Music has
no,
that-
no argument there. Agreed entirely. But do you think that is more important than, for example, Walt Disney to
Yes.
America? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And you agree,
Yes.
Walter?
Oh, yeah. It's the only great original art form we have.
Yeah.
Jazz. I think Walt Disney was very creative.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was trying to think of my people, I'd say, who would I pick for cinema, movies, which is a great invention, like I picked for television. And it was Walt Disney, but then he didn't really invent it. And then I got kind of confused and figured I'd leave it to you and Ari to figure out,
And went to
Samuel
Philo.
Goldwyn or, who invented
Jack
Because it
Warner.
was the only American art form that was truly American. You guys picked him.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's not just that. His genius is so towering. You cannot like what we call swing music, which in 1939 was 75% of every sale of jazz music was swing. But in the early days, it wasn't called swing. It was called orchestrated Armstrong. That's
Right.
what they called it. And a guy
What's the
in
difference? Was there a
Depression.
difference?
No.
No, it was the name. The original kind of informal name was orchestra, meaning somebody who had basically taken the atom and split it in art, and that was Armstrong. And in fact, I would, if we had time, we could reference my jazz. There's an amazing concert that he gave in Copenhagen, and a friend of mine who's a music guy at the Berklee School of Music in Boston said he imagined that Fermi and Bohr and all these people working on quantum mechanics went and heard him do his thing and went, I get it now, because he would just do one note. Hold it. I mean, it was just it's one of the most amazing.
The funny thing,
pieces
you're
of music.
saying that's when we know AI has hit AGI, when you can take jazz, understand it, and then reference it to what you're doing. And
That would be the ultimate test.
that would be the
But
ultimate.
let me add something on Armstrong, which is the notion of improvisation in art, which is so important to the spirit of what America is all about.
Exactly.
There is a moment when he's the second cornetist in, I guess it's
King
King
Oliver.
Oliver's band, and they do West End blues. They've just invented phonograph recordings, and they record it, and it's done by the sheet music. King Oliver gets sick. About 3 months later, they play it again, and Louis Armstrong is the lead trumpeter at that point. And he does a 17-bar cadenza when they start, the ba-ba-da-da-da-da-da, in which he's totally improvising. And that's when you get this notion of, all right, we're not going to be like a algorithm AI following the sheet music. We're going to be an improvisational culture.
Hey, Ken, how did do we know who taught him, or he just taught himself? He just figured it out?
No, he's first of all, he's in New Orleans, and the reason why Walter's so great is that he's in New Orleans and he's
Welcome from New
just
Orleans.
just baking it in the this place which is where everything flows down, it's fertile, everything comes up, it's where it is. And so he happens to arrive at this moment in time where music is evolving from ragtime and the blues. It's synthesizing into what we now call jazz. And they're people that he's listening to as a little boy in town. And he gets taken in by a Russian, a Jewish Russian family. And he wore a Star of David the rest of his life. And they kept him off the streets and gave him a cornet. And he started imitating stuff, and then all of a sudden he was good enough to play in this band, and then good enough to play in that. Yeah. Then King Oliver comes along and eventually takes him up to you could just do the hot fives and sevens. You could take Potato Head Blues that predate this. He does a thing on Ain't Misbehavin', in which he samples in the middle of it Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin. Like, I mean, it's just you cannot imagine the depth of his creativity.
Let me for a moment, if I can, just raise it to what Ken said, which is why the diversity of America leads to its improvisation. He's growing up in the early 1900s in New Orleans. He's basically been abandoned by his family. His mother's a prostitute. His father has disappeared. So he's being raised in the colored waifs home where they give him a cornet and teach him. He's living near Storyville, where the ragtime pianists are playing at the whorehouses. The Spanish-American War has just ended, so people are coming with the 2/4 time in the marching bands, but hawking their cornets. The Karnofsky family, the Jewish family Ken told you about, buys him one of these cornets that's been hawked so he can play on their rag cart. He hangs around the French Opera House and the drummers in Congo Square. And Buddy Bolden has just started ragging music in uptown New Orleans. All of that comes together because of the diversity of that city, and Lewis brings it together to make it jazz.
Wow. And what was the date? Like, how old was he when he, was he?
He lied and said he was born on July 4th, 1900. I think for sure he was born in 1901.
Right.
But he's playing in Mahogany Hall. Lulu White, who was mixed race, Creole of color, had the best whorehouse in Storyville. And what you have is the ragtime pianist,
Scott Joplin.
Scott Joplin and others are playing at these places. So it's basically around 1915, when he's about 14 years old, that he starts pulling it together.
Wow.
And this Buddy
Jelly Roll
Bolden
Morton,
may be,
I meant to say, yeah.
Yeah, but and Jelly Roll, yeah. But Buddy Bolden may be the first person to ever play what we'd call jazz, certainly Jelly Roll, but the person who takes it up and out to the country, to the world, is Louis Armstrong.
That's incredible.
I mean, it's just...
Let me just be very clear. After that explanation, one, you're supposedly be in the music business, that you didn't have this explanation, you're a failure.
Oh.
He's on the list.
I'm just entirely useless. Do you think that we
if we get MLK and Louis Armstrong and I'm like a happy camper, I'm willing to
how
be
many of Eleanor Roosevelt
conciliatory.
There are two Eleanor Roosevelts. There is 3
Martin Luther Kings.
I'm making a George Marshall argument here.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have there is no Louis Armstrong predates George Marshall, at least in terms of impact, but we do not have the country that we live in, that we identify, the freedom that we're talking about, the individuality. Like, forget cars or the impact of a factory line, forget a polio vaccine or any of these things if we don't have a country that is protected and a global order that is protected. That is George Marshall.
I'm going to look to the experts.
I'm a fan of George Marshall, and I love you, Ben, but first of all, you have to remember the Marshall Plan was come up by Atchison, who brings it to Truman, and Truman says, okay, this is really important, and Atchison has to say to him, yes, Mr. President, but we can't name it after you or the Republicans will decimate it. And he'll say, yeah, I know the Republicans would do that. Uh, and Atchison and Lovett say we have to name it after George Marshall. I think Marshall was great, but he wasn't indispensable. There are others at that time. He makes the top 10, but not my top four.
Okay,
Ken, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I think so. And what I would add is that, Ben, I think it was a little bit of hyperbole insofar as the world that Americans live in is less Marshall than the Europe that has
correct.
been up until this moment the sort of standard whatever. That's George Marshall. And I would say that he is an administrator, so he's picking subordinate talents. Like George Washington may not be the best general, in fact, makes lots of mistakes, but he knows how to pick subordinate talent. And so Marshall's good at that. So you do get an Eisenhower.
Yeah, we give
out
him
of that.
credit for deciding he wasn't going to lead D-Day. He was going to let Eisenhower do it.
Yeah, it's really
Okay.
But
there's-
wasn't he the biggest proponent for D-Day in the first place?
Yeah, no, I'm giving him a lot of credit.
Yeah, he's on the list. He's number 10.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, who's making
the biggest proponent for D-Day is Franklin Roosevelt too.
Okay. So
right? I mean, Churchill is so dead
over
set against
Steve Jobs. If you don't have Van Neumann,
Our world would be totally different if we didn't have iPhones, if we didn't have the tech, if we didn't have computers.
yeah, but you
plug and
needed
play.
somebody actually doing the mathematics and all the other stuff to get to that point. He gives us everything.
Von Neumann.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's like saying George Washington's mother is, important.
No. What? Ken?
I mean, people have to do stuff with it, right?
But he
And
gives you
so-
the foundation.
Walter's choice with John
Mauchly.
Mauchly is pretty good because ENIAC is such an advance. But I think I would give it to Steve
over both of them?
who I knew and who I just thought was visionary. Lots of.
Well, wait, hold on,
Makes
guys.
you
Let's just
slightly
be very clear.
larger.
Did he not, for the operating system, did he not take that from somebody else? I think it was Xerox.
But there's also part of Steve Jobs that
Yeah.
is beyond the tech. That is like he, as an archetypal American and entrepreneur, represents, I think, venture and tech to us more than anybody.
Well, Ari makes a good point, which is didn't Steve Jobs build on, von Neumann, or didn't Mauchly build? Well, one of the things about innovation is it's a team sport. It's a collaborative effort in the 20th century in America. And nobody goes into a garage or a garret and just invents something. So that's why when you're picking a Mount Rushmore, it's a little bit difficult. Von Neumann came up with the architecture and the concept, but vision without, execution is just hallucination. It took a guy like Mauchly to actually build the damn thing. Steve did the most in terms of having a vision of what a personal computer could be in your pocket and also executing on the vision. I think Von Neumann, I think Mauchly, I think Steve Jobs are all great. But in the end, we live in Steve Jobs' world, the personal computer.
Amen.
Agreed. You okay with that, Ari?
Agreed.
So upset by this. I'm really upset by this.
But he's accepting it.
But, I mean, he did take the operating system, I think it was from Xerox, right?
Correct.
He then has to leave the job because it was failing, then comes back and sees. How did he? What's the story behind?
Is this still Van Neumann?
No, this is Steve Jobs. How did he?
Steve.
What was the phone? The phone was not his; it was somebody else's, right? You had the BlackBerry first. They liked it because it sounded like a typewriter, and he then invents. He then comes up with the.
Ari, what do you have in your back pocket?
Oh, stop it, Ken. That doesn't matter.
What do you have in your back
I have
pocket?
an Apple iPhone. Yeah, I agree. I mean, we all. It has changed our lives.
Ben,
Oh,
what do you have in your back pocket?
I have an iPhone and
Did you have him on your list?
he's on my list.
So there
I
was,
don't need
he
any
was
argument
two
for
on the
Steve Jobs.
list.
And Walter,
Was he
Ari,
on?
give
Was
it
he
up.
number 5 for you, Ken?
He was number 5 for me, and I'm doing this. I am just going to now pivot, assuming we beat Ari up on this. That only Ari of everybody. I had two women. Ari had one woman. You guys, chauvinist pigs, Ben and Walter had no women, and I'm going to argue vociferously, even if it ends up being a third person, that we have a woman in this.
Ken is running for president.
In this thing.
Ken is running for president.
We have Eleanor Roosevelt. Didn't we have her on the list?
Yeah, we've got her, and Henrietta Lacks, but she was.
I would go with Steve Jobs, I guess.
We're putting Steve Jobs on the list.
So what's our list?
We got MLK, we got Louis Armstrong, and we got Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
I thought we had Eleanor Roosevelt.
No, you want Eleanor Roosevelt.
But two of us had Eleanor Roosevelt.
I want Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah, you have to have Eleanor Roosevelt.
Okay, so
even though it was a little cheat because she kind of was the president.
Of the remaining names,
I would disagree. She kind of was married to the president. I don't think she was kind of the president. He did what he was going to do. She had lots of good ideas.
Well, the last term.
Yeah, I think that's the Woodrow Wilson Edith thing. It's more Edith than it is Eleanor.
I think also, no shade to Eleanor Roosevelt, Henry Ford is more important than Eleanor Roosevelt for America.
Oh, give me a break. Yeah.
Really?
Ken.
Why do you say that, Ken?
No.
Why?
Well, because I think it's what
Are you driving a car,
Walter's
Ken?
very the difference between Neumann and even Mauchly and Jobs, I think Walter parsed that pretty well.
You know, the one person I'm gonna throw somebody that was on nobody's list.
Since anti-Semitism is as American as apple pie, I'm not going to make the argument that we shouldn't have an anti-Semite on it. But he's one of the worst, you guys.
But separate church and state here a little bit, just as in terms of his impact. If you knew nothing about,
I'm glad we're not doing this in Germany.
You know, the person that we don't have on the list is Einstein, and we can't add him to the list.
He was an American citizen.
Walter, do you have him on your list?
Yeah, no, he said he was.
I said the problem I had with him is, and you could have the same problem with von Neumann, which is
They're not.
He didn't start out as an American.
Von Neumann is Hungarian.
Right.
They both become American citizens because they flee the Nazis.
We also don't have Oppenheimer on this list. We don't have. There's a bunch of important Americans, but I think that
Oppenheimer I thought about. Yeah.
Yeah, he's good. Me too. I have him in
on
my
my
top 10.
extended list.
there's also the question of, like, despite his impact, was it the right impact, which is a whole other conversation.
Okay.
So
I'm gonna go. I think we should have Eleanor Roosevelt on the list.
I think
And
we
not
should
for
have
the
Eleanor
reason that we need a
Roosevelt.
woman on the list, but I thought she was so
No,
influential.
she's pretty. Yeah, I think she's. I think the idea that you're right on everything but prohibition, and that I give her a pass on.
Walter, how do you feel about this?
I'm all right. I think part of her influence is derivative, as you
Right.
said.
Yeah.
If you're, it's the same. I think Susan B. Anthony doesn't quite make it mainly into the 1900s.
And I give it to Elizabeth
died.
Cady Stanton too. They all die in the first.
Yeah,
decade of the 20th
that
century.
you could make an interesting argument about the rights of women and everything else. That Margaret Sanger is up there because the invention and the spread of birth control, as well as of
Wow.
women's rights.
I didn't even
connected
think
to
of
Great
her.
argument.
Yeah. She's problematic too. But I had before I read the fine print, I had Elizabeth Cady Stanton like the first thing I wrote down because I thought we're gonna have a woman because she was married and so she did the great writing. Susan B. Anthony was unmarried and so she was sort of the sort of the legs of the movement. But
Now we've added people that were, even though we've.
Well, we're not going to include them. We're just talking about them.
They're 19th century.
Yeah.
Right. Just
I mean,
because
Rachel Carson
if you're going
would
to
be
do
a
that,
conversation for 20th century.
Mark Twain lived into the 20th century. So I didn't include him though. I'd put him on my list.
I didn't add. I had Ernest Hemingway, but
Yeah, Hemingway would
So
be.
over John Mauchly, over Farnsworth, over Henrietta Lacks, over Walt Disney, over George Marshall, we're putting Eleanor Roosevelt.
it's actually one of you got to decide because
I'm okay with it.
Ken and I are there.
I'm okay. I'm okay with it. Walter's the brain. I'm the civilian. I'll follow Walter's lead.
I think I'll just go with the flow here because she has, as Ken puts it, I mean, we're picking people and then we're taking away points, rightly so, for being an anti-Semite, whatever it may be. She scores points for being very good morally.
Yeah. Actually, great morally.
Of all the people here, she's the
Ken
most-
has some hang up about prohibition. It's In New Orleans, it's not yet cocktail hour.
Yeah, right. No. I just thought it's the only amendment to the Constitution that restricted human rights, and it's the only amendment that's been repealed.
Hasn't New Hampshire been a dry state?
No.
Okay.
We've been running liquor from Canada this whole time. No,
I think we in Louisiana think every other state.
Well, the question is
dry.
we should have had cocktails delivered to both of you right about now.
That's right.
But in Louisiana, there are northern parishes that are dry, that were dry at least for a long time after the repeal, because it's the Bible Belt up there in Shreveport and Monroe, as you say it, right? Monroe.
Yeah, well, it's why we don't go upstate after that.
They have no green vegetables north of Natchitoches, right?
Yeah.
North,
Fortunately, it means they all
right,
come
so
down
here's our list.
We got our final four.
Final four: MLK, Louis Armstrong, Steve Jobs, Eleanor Roosevelt. That's a pretty good list.
It is a really good list.
Well, thank you guys as always. Every time we do this, Ben and I learn something, and you guys have been great teachers.
This is so much fun. This is the best hour that I've had in a long time, you guys.
Thank you guys.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.